It is the end of March of 2026, and the first Duelist Cup of the year has just been wrapped up. So I want to take this opportunity to highlight some of the best performing archetypes in the game while they're at their full power, before they are getting hit in the ban list. This is mostly going to be an archive video, and we're also going to discuss the larger Master Duel meta as a whole. The last few packs released into the game has all been very impactful, with a lot of new decks from these packs has been interchangeable between Tier 1 and Tier 2. The three undeniable frontrunners in the meta include Vanquish Soul K9, the Yummy engine, and Dracotail, which are all part of the Justice Hunter set in the physical card game. Starting off with Dracotail, that was released in December of 2025 in the Aerial Superiority pack. Out of the three archetypes, this one is probably the most simple. They don't have a long combo line as some of the other decks, and mostly just rely on a small subset of fusion monsters and a few targeted traps from their own archetype to be their main form of disruptions. The archetype also have a lot of synergies with non-engines monster hand traps to add an extra layer of disruptions onto their established mode, as they can more easily draw into them with the innate draw power of their traps and also the ability to recycle monster from their grave with Odalion. The biggest strength of Dracotail come in the form of their efficiency, with a lot of their main deck monsters have two really good effects that you can use every single turn. Some of them also double up as a really good board removal because they are non-targeting and can be very easily chilling block. The value you get from fusion summoning with Dracotail is so high that just resolving one fusion summon can dramatically swing the game in your favor, depending on how many Dracotail monsters you can use for your fusion summon. The second big strength about Dracotail is that it also have a really good going second potential, with 5 mana allow you to fusion summon during the opponent's turn, and Key 2 Dracotail allows you to fusion summon, in addition to its search effect if your opponent controls a monster. On the flip side, because the archetype is overly reliant on just a few mechanics, there is a few cards that completely shut down Dracotail. Graveyard Head like Retaliating Sea and Dimension Shifter more or less spell doom for Dracotail, as they need to send their monster to the graveyard to check out their effects when they are being used as a fusion material. As for going second, Red Reboot is a card that can shut down a lot of disruption potential in Dracotail. Dracotail was released to Master Duel at full power and has been a top tier deck in the meta ever since its inceptions. It is even better than in the physical card game because we have Anaconda unbanned in Master Duel and Branded Fusion are 2 copies, which really solidify this to be the best version of Dracotail to play with. You can even play with a floodgate like the 5 Rainbow Magician because the Branded Fusion can dump it to the graveyard. In the Duelist Cup, Dracotail is the second highest represented deck in the top 100, and the list on the right was the top Dracotail player, finished at rank number 5. In the aftermath of the Duelist Cup, Dracotail will receive their first 2 hits to the kit, getting both Lucius and Rahu limited to 1. Rahu Dracotail is a card that is limited in both TCG and OCG, so this hit is to be expected. But the other format limit Malulu instead of Lucius, which in my opinion will hurt Dracotail a lot more, because you can at least replace Malulu with some other ways to fusion summon, like for example Cortesia, but you cannot replace the starter aspect of Lucius. Because of this, you are much less likely to gain access to your key 5 mana when you're going first, and you'll have less materials to fuse into your Dalion. These hits are a big deal for Dracotail, but the deck is still mostly gonna be fine moving forward. Again, because the deck still have access to Anaconda for now, and more than that, the deck can make very well use of the new branded support and the new fusion monster. Up next, we have the Yummy engine, which was released in the Epical Predators pack back in January of 2026. While a lot of archetypes in this video are all very flexible and can be played with multiple other different archetypes, Yummy is the only archetype with multiple different variations of the deck that have found success at the highest level of competition. The main reason for this is just because of how stupidly easy it is to bridge into Yummy. You thought Link 1 was broken before? Well, now Yummy is making them even more broken, as literally any deck or engine that can summon a level 1 monster in addition to a Link 1 will now have access to the entire Yummy engine, which by itself is already a lot of disruptions. A lot of them are inbuilt into their kit in various forms, but they also excel at putting other generic monsters onto their board, like Sprite Elf or Masquerader, just from the sheer number of bodies they can summon. And of course, they also have access to the Herald of Hoplite, which is a nasty floodgate on top of an Omni Negate that shut down a lot of strategies. Out of the 3 decks that I highlight in this video, this one is probably the strongest deck when it's go first undisrupted, putting up a board that is nearly unbreakable. Like I've said, one of the biggest strengths of Yummy is how easily this deck can be mixed with other archetypes and vice versa. It can be a big package like the Sofa Code, which can bring their own disruptions, or just a small engine like Skyjacker, just to name a few of the most popular ones. Another really good aspect about the deck is that their synchro monsters are really hard to interact with, combined with the fact that Snatchy can be used to easily dodge any of your effects, make them a pretty hard deck to pilot against. One last thing I want to note is that the deck has a fantastic OTK potential and can easily punch through any big threat on the board with their field spell. In terms of their weakness, because most of the disruption that Yummy have are focused around their monsters, cards like Forbidden Droplet or Dark Ruler no more can do a lot of works against Yummy if you don't have another engine to supplement it. Aside from that, I would say that the only other weakness that Yummy have is that they are not as good of a go second deck as the other two archetypes in this video, because they don't have an immune disruption that they can use during the opponent's turn. The version of Yummy that I will highlight in this video will be Mitsurugi Yummy, which is my personal favorite version of the deck. Mitsurugi can bridge into Yummy by using the Skyjacker engine, and Yummy can bridge into Mitsurugi with Hero of Arclight. What is particularly nice about this version of the deck is that you have a lot more Omni Negate, like Baron the Fleur and the Mitsurugi Trap to protect you against board breakers. And while as strong as this deck already is, this is actually not the best version of Yummy that we could have had. Prior to the release of Yummy, Konami does pre-hit a few cards for the deck, namely limiting both Hornet Drone and Hero of Arclight, while also semi-limiting Snatchy and Ban Obedient School. As for the result in the Duelist Cup, the version of Yummy that performed the best was actually Silver Coat Yummy. I don't really think that this version is actually a lot better than the other Yummy versions, but what really helped this deck in the Duelist Cup is that it has so much space in the deck to play a lot of non-engine, which really help in an environment where you need to have a flexible deck list so that you can adapt to whatever you are facing. It also really helped that you can play a really strong hand trap like the Herald of Orange Light. This is the list of the best performing Silver Coat Yummy player, finished at number 4. The only hit that the Yummy engine received after the Duelist Cup will be Cup C Yummy going from 3 to 1. This is a pretty big hit for Yummy because Cup C is the best starter and extended for the deck. But importantly, the power ceiling of the deck is still gonna stay the same, so rest assured, this archetype is not going anywhere soon. And last but not least, we have Vanquish Soul K9. This one was released in the Strike of Justice pack back in February, right after Yummy. This is one of the few instances where two different archetypes have so much synergy with each other that mixing them together create a deck that is far more powerful than either of them separately. Vanquish Soul has a lot of level 5 monsters that they can easily summon to the field, which can help bridge into K9 or provide extra material for a rank 5 XZ summon. Vice versa, K9 provides 2 out of the 3 attributes that Vanquish Soul need to reveal in your hand to activate their effects, and of course they can also somewhat bridge into Vanquish Soul if need be. This is one of the most versatile decks in the meta and in recent history of modern Yu-Gi-Oh! They can play the game in various different ways, depending on the resource and the situation presented to them. They can play the game fast with the K9 engine, or they can play the grind game with the Vanquish Soul engine. They are really good at doing both. They are also good at playing their way out of situations where other decks would struggle, like for instance against a Floodgate or against a Tower monster with an alternative burn win condition. One of the biggest strengths with this deck is provided by the K9 engine. It helps to make the deck almost impervious to almost all monster hand traps in the game, except for the Maxi and the Mochamis of the world of course. And what's worse, you can also be punished by using your hand traps if they have an Izuna in their hand. This deck also has the best potential for disruption during the opponent's turn, using just monsters from their hand, that sometimes the game is decided before you even get your first turn. Not only will you have an Izuna and a Lupus that can go into a rank 5 XZ, the Vanquish Soul engine also contribute with Holy Seal ability to either summon a Vanquish Soul monster from your deck, or take control of a monster with the lowest attack points that your opponent control. If you're lucky and have enough attribute in your hand, you can also have an extra disruption with your Caesar. Ironically, the deck's biggest weakness is kind of itself. The deck is very inflexible when it comes to deck building. There is not a lot of room for non-engine in general, and the option you have for choosing hand traps is also pretty limited. Basically, you can only really play monster hand traps of specific attribute. The deck also play a bunch of cards that doesn't work by themselves, so it is also prone to being bricky. The pre-hit that this deck got before its new support definitely play a big part in limiting its consistency, where both of its best starter in Raisin and Stake Your Soul being semi-limited, and also losing one copy of Xiaolong, which lowered the amount of fire attribute monster in the deck. The K9 engine also saw one of its best cards in the Yugioh being semi-limited. With a very rigid deck building process, a lot of the Vanquish Soul lists ended up being mostly the same with very little variation. The biggest deck building challenge that this deck has is that the Vanquish Soul engine do not have enough fire monster to be consistent enough to supplement its plays, and the K9 engine itself cannot solve this problem. People have tried to play with other non-engine fire monster in this deck to help boost the attribute monster's count, but all of the most competitive version of this deck all choose to just play within their own engine. I would say that the biggest customization that you can have with this deck is just within the extra deck, where you can have a variety of options you can play for your rank 5 XCs. If we take a look at the Duelist Cup results, we'll see that Vanquish Soul K9 does not have as much representation within the top 100 as either Dracotail or Yummy Silver Coat. That doesn't mean that the deck isn't as competitive as those two decks though. Case in point, this Vanquish Soul K9 list was used by the rank 1 finish in the Duelist Cup. Of course, Vanquish Soul K9 do get a small nudge in the ban list following the Duelist Cup, limiting Stake Your Soul to 1 copy. It is probably fair to say that if the other two decks got hit, and this deck doesn't, then it will become the undisputed best deck in the game. But this is definitely the smaller hit out of the 3 decks here. These 3 Juggernaut archetypes has been the main focal point in the Master Duel meta in the early days of 2026, and while these decks are very strong in their own ways, they are not overwhelmingly powerful and completely eclipse the meta. There are still a lot of space for rogue decks even in a competitive environment. Even some of the older decks are emerging once again because people aren't really playing the counter to them anymore. The first wave of hit for these decks will now open up even more space in the meta for experimentation, while we also wait for new arrivals to shake up the meta. The last few months have been very busy months for Master Duel because we are keep receiving new top tier decks one after another, and the meta is shifting constantly. The one good thing about these new decks is that they don't feel as bad at when you're going second as some of the top tier decks before. Don't get me wrong, going first is still the king, but at least with some of these decks, you do have some plays you can make during your opponent's turn, which is a new trend for modern design that can really help close the gap between going first and going second. And also a lot of new decks following this were also receiving this kind of mechanics. So once again, and for the last time, the Justice Hunters meta at its full power.